We were walking up to one of the ruins, which you're going to see in a moment, at Ludington. There's Becky and the Canadians and the tour guide walking up a hill to the first monument, or ruin. This, I believe, is a ruin with trees growing out of it. There's a lot of excavation that happens to reveal these ruins. I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it. These are more ruins that really haven't been put together. These are just the rocks, and what they do is they take the rocks, they number the rocks, and they clean them, they clean out the area, take out trees, do what they need to do, and they put back the ruins in nice form. Here's a tree, and you can see the marks on it, and I think I don't know if it was a rubber tree, but they did get some kind of poly something material. Here's a ruin, not very impressive looking. Don't worry, it gets better. This is how they find the ruins. I don't know if they're done with that or not, but here you go. So this is the ruin. Sometimes they find them in better shape than others. Here's a guide that was at the ruin. These are unique ruins because they cut these things into them. They cut these, they're not just like bricks, there's grooves. I'll show you a close-up later. And here's another shot of the ruins. Again, these are not as impressive as they are in Guatemala, which we'll see later. Thought I'd include it just the same. So here's some ruins that they just do partial repair on, probably because of resources and also to show you how they found them, but I suspect mainly due to lack of resources. Here's the guide. Another very nice guy, spoke good English, very informative. Now he's explaining about the different rocks, obviously. They started doing these ruins about 900 BC, and they kept going until 900 AD. So they were doing this for almost 2,000 years. If you see this block in the middle, how they've cut that groove out, and they do that so that the ruin will not shift during an earthquake, and that makes it more stable. That's the only place they do that. They didn't do them in Mexico, and they didn't do them in Guatemala, but they did it in Belize. I guess another reason for the Guatemalans to hate the Belize people. Just kidding. But they did come up with this clever method to cut a groove in the stones so that it would make the whole structure more stable. And I thought that was interesting. And apparently this location is the only one where you have that. So you can see this is a wider shot, and you can see some of the other cut grooves. This thing in the front, towards the middle, I believe is an altar. And you know what they did on those altars? Basically, they cut people's hearts out and put them there and sacrificed them to the gods. So these ruins have been abandoned for over 1,000 years until they discovered them in the 1800s by a Brit. And then, of course, they started excavating. These have a rounded edge, which is also unique to these ruins. Generally, they're squared off, but these are rounded, which is very unique. Here's a tree growing out of a ruin, and they've been there for quite a while. Now, the Mayans, they say they disappeared. They didn't disappear. They believe that the Mayans over-farmed the area. There was drought. Also, the Toltecs, those guys were very vicious and very warlike, and they were fighting with the Mayans constantly. And I know in Mexico, the Toltecs were responsible for replacing a lot of people, and they would enslave the tribe that they would conquer. Another thing they did, they would build new ruins right on top of the old ruins. So they would capture the power of the old ruin and just increase their power by building more ruins on top of it, or more monuments and temples, I should say, which became ruins. So sometimes they would build 4 or 5 levels of monuments and temples right on top of each other, so they would go higher into the sky and capture the power of the previous builders. Here's a tree growing out of a ruin, and the trees obviously also displace the bricks. These are, I guess, wild irises just growing right out there. That's a great thing about this area, Guatemala and Belize. I mean, there was fruit growing on these trees. I mean, people live literally off the land, and I thought that was pretty cool. Just like Chicago. Now we're in the museum, and here are some artifacts that they found in the ruins. More artifacts. After we were done seeing this ruin, these ladies were waiting for us to sell us more things, and actually we bought quite a bit from them. They had some interesting things, some tapestries and various things that we did buy. And this lady was nice enough to let me take her picture. I didn't have to give her $4 because I had given her more money previously, so she was pretty happy. Here's some cows with horns. I don't know if they're bulls. I guess would this make them bulls or what? This was a cute little girl we saw on the side of the road. Our driver knew her mother and was talking with her. I didn't do anything to cause that expression on her face. She was actually just grimacing from the sun probably, or just an inquisitive look, even though it looks a little pained. Here's some kids walking home from school. You can see on the right these bridges, so we went over many of these bridges, and I guess they're stable. And this is an example of the bad road we were talking about, and this is why the Canadian lady got sick. I wasn't feeling too tough myself, quite frankly, especially after she had her little incident. Here's a interesting plant. Looks like it was spray painted or something. This is a clinic, and there's an American in this place that's giving free shots and free medical care to the Belizean children. So that's very nice. Unfortunately, the schools in Belize are not free, and you have to come up with about $2,000 a year to send your kid to school and buy the books. So that's an unfortunate thing because, as we all realize, education is the key, and if you can't educate your population, you're not going anywhere. But at least we got an American doctor down there administering free medical care. This was also in the museum. I thought this was really interesting. This reminded me of Macumba with the masks. I presume he's got a mask on. Maybe that's his real face. I don't know. But he's probably the head guy, one of the witch doctors or one of the priests or something. And this was a photograph that I took. I photographed a photograph off the wall. And here's a bunch of folks from an obviously old picture. The guy on the left looks like a British explorer or geologist. This is one of the shamans, and the guy on the left is probably another shaman. So maybe they had a bunch of shamans, or I don't know who's the senior or junior, but I thought that was interesting. These things are called stelas. Stelas tell the story about the temple or monument that we will see. So the stelas were in front. Most of them have been collapsed. A lot of them have been taken away. A lot of problems with the stelas, but that was a very well preserved one that they had in their museum, and they're able to crack the code and they tell a story. Probably my favorite part of the ruins is seeing the ball courts. They played these ball games, and it was really an amazing thing. They would have a big tournament, and then the two best teams of the empire would play off, and to see who's the best team in the empire. The bottom line is the winning captain would be sacrificed to the gods, because they only wanted to give the best heart to the gods. They didn't want to give the loser to the gods. However, the loser, so as not to throw the game, would be also sacrificed, or he would either be killed, or he would be given to slavery, or something of that nature. He would definitely not be let off scot-free. So both captains knew they were going to die before they played this game. The game is composed of 5 guys on each team. They all wore these plates on themselves to protect themselves from the ball. The ball is composed of a rock which is surrounded by rubber, and it's the size of a softball. And you cannot use your hands, but you have to get it through this hoop, which isn't a regular hoop like in basketball, but it's a vertical hoop that's made of stone with a hole in the middle, and you would try and get the ball through the hoop by hitting it with the sides or your shoulder or your feet, but you couldn't use your hands. And it was very tough to score a goal, because if you can imagine putting this ball through this hoop that was facing you sideways, so it was very difficult to play this game. The ball court you're seeing right now is a very small court. The ones we saw in Chichén Itzá were about a city block long, and they were in these big amphitheaters, and it was just an amazing spectacle. And I would have loved to have seen some of these games. This is a terrace, obviously. Don't know where it goes. Probably goes up to where they did some things, maybe sacrificing. There's more trees growing out of ruins. So you can see this tree has vines wrapped around it. These vines will eventually kill it. It's not really a symbiotic relationship. It's more of a parasitic relationship, and eventually it does kill it. And here's an example of a tree that has been felled by the infestation of the vines. This is a crypt, actually. They did find somebody in here, and this is a burial crypt of probably one of the priests or one of the rulers of the area. Very well manicured, and they did find artifacts. One of the Canadians pointed out this tree growing on top of the tree. Shot that photo. Now these are stelas. As you can see, one is down, or there's a few of them down, and there's some of them that are standing up. Some of them have inscriptions, some of them don't. We were leaving Belize City on our way to Guatemala, and I was able to photograph the rainbow. A great shot, if I do say so myself. Here's Becky in the Guatemala airport, and on the left, that was our bus driver that took us to our hotel, or the room in Tikal, Guatemala. This is the place we stayed in Tikal. It was actually in the jungle. Interesting thing happened, in Tikal. Guatemala is not as prosperous. We're staying at a 4-star resort by their standards. By our standards, it would certainly not be a 4-star resort. We were right in the jungle, and we only stayed one day in Guatemala. We flew in the afternoon, got our bearings, got our guide for the next day, and then at 5 o'clock in the morning, we went out and explored the ruins. And we did that, and we caught a plane back to Belize that same day. At 2:30 in the morning, Becky's watch stopped, and my cell phone clock was in Chicago, because I forgot my cell phone in Chicago, and I don't wear a watch, so I needed to find out what time it was. So I walked down the road, and we took a lantern, and of course I asked this guy for the quietest, furthest room from anybody else. So at 2:30 in the morning, I've got this lantern, and I'm walking through the jungle, basically. It was a paved road. It was nice. I mean, it wasn't that bad, but this whole place is in the jungle. So the guy tells me what time it was, and actually I think he had a weapon, and he was protecting us from whoever, because, they want to make sure the tourists are not injured and killed and robbed so that more tourists will come back. And they did a very good job. I felt very safe there. So the guy told me what time it was, and I said, okay, thank you. Went back to our room here. About 2 minutes after I got back to the room, I heard this amazingly loud growl, and I was terrified. It sounded just like a lion or something, or a tiger or something. And Becky, everyone was woken up by it. It's just an amazingly loud sound. And it did this like 15 times, and I'm thinking, this thing it smelled me, and it tracked me, and I just barely got back into the room before he came, and I said, maybe, he smells me, he's gonna jump through the window. I didn't know what the heck was gonna happen. So after 15 of these growls, it went away, and we went to sleep. Our guide the next day, Caesar, said that it was a howler monkey. And they've got this guttural thing that they can do with their voices that really makes them sound very dominant. So that was interesting. So this is like at 5 in the morning. Caesar gets us. Actually, it was about 4:30, and we're walking in the dark with a flashlight up these hills and mountains or something. And we ended up walking high enough so that we were 20 stories up when we took this picture. So here's a temple, and as you can see, these temples in Tikal are going to be much more impressive than they were in Belize. And you can see the close-up of the multi-layers of the different temples that they built on top of each other. You can see that there's stairs some places and this and that. This is called a harumo tree whose leaf helps asthma sufferers. Caesar spelled it H-U-A-R-U-M-O. The harumo tree whose leaf helps asthma sufferers. And that's what this is. Here's a close-up of the leaf. Here's another temple. We were up on another temple. I mean, there were so many. And fortunately, they call these temples Temple 1, 2, 3, 4, and don't give them very much character. Here's a temple that I climbed, and you can see Becky and Caesar all the way down there. There's one guy, then beyond them you see Becky and Caesar. And here you can see the multi-levels of another temple. And here's another temple whose thatched roof has been restored. And you can also see some of the different levels. Here's a partially restored ruin with a tree growing in it. Here's another one. This might be Temple 5, I'm not sure. Here's a Guatemalan raccoon. Here's his family. They travel in packs of about 10, I think. Cute things. Here's Becky and me. You know, it's amazing. The Mayans walked up these trails to build these temples over 2,000 years ago, or almost 2,000 years ago. And just to look at those stairs and to know that these guys were lugging these huge stones up there. You see this stuff in movies, but that's the trail, there's the rocks, and there's the temple that they built. It's quite amazing to me. This is the main court. So you've got some temples. You've also got priests' residences like this one. This is where they lived. We'll show a close-up of some of their rooms in a minute. So they lived in these areas, and the people obviously never were allowed to be in the area. This is the priest's sleeping area, and they didn't require much room, but this was probably living in the lap of luxury at the time. There's a temple passageway, mysterious. There's Becky, and that's the entrance to the priest's living quarters. So they would walk up the stairs and either go left or right into their various rooms. Here's some hallways. These holes that you see on the upper right-hand corner were wood, and wood would be put in there, and they would hang things from there. Maybe they would hang their clothes or meat, or who knows what the heck they hung there. And this is another sleeping area shot from top down. So you see they would enter from the bottom, walk up the area, and go to sleep on the second level. And here's another view of the court area. Pretty luxurious quarters for the times. There's another temple with a stela in front of it. I don't know if they're saying anything, the stela, but they are there. And you can see the room on top where they would probably do their ceremonial thing and do their sacrifices, actually, on the altar. And here is one of the preserved images that was carved out of the rock in one of the temples. This was probably one of the gods. This is another area. I'm not sure if this is a temple area or a residency. This is a stone that would be in front of one of the temples, and this is where they would put the heart of the sacrifice. So they would kill you, rip your chest open, pull your heart out, put it on the stone, and say, "Here you go, God, this one's for you." See the various stela. I believe this is a temple area. Some details in the temples. Another design. This is interesting. This is where, okay, this is definitely the priest's living quarters. And you see that hole at the bottom left? That is where the priest would hide his tools. Our guide told us that that's definitely the room or the small hutch that the priest would put his tools that he would use to basically cut people open with and rip out the hearts and give them to the gods. And here's a close-up of that room. So the priest would hide his, it was probably a door on that, or maybe a boulder, I'm not sure, or maybe it was just like that, and his tools would be inside. Here's more living quarters. So you go up those stairs and make a left or a right, go to your room. I like this passageway shot. This is the Chichén tree, as Caesar, our guide, told us. Obviously, it's not called that, but the Chichones, or the little fruits, are what they use to make, you could make rubber out of that. They don't use that for rubber, but you could make rubber out of that. It is kind of a polymer. Here's another example of a tree being surrounded by these vines. And here's a scale model of the area. Now, apparently only 20% of the temples have been revealed, but I suspect that they have revealed the most important ones.